Despite widespread protests in the country, the Kenyan Finance Bill 2024 has scaled second reading after being passed by a vote of 204 to 115 in the Kenyan Parliament. Now, with this development, the bill will proceed to the committee stage, and next up is the third reading, after which, if it passes the third reading, President William Ruto will assent to it. The bill has encountered great resistance from citizens due to concerns about its economic impact, as it includes various new tax measures. Now, here are youth in Kenya during a number of protests that have been sparked since last week, chanting, "We are peaceful," while showing off bullets from shots fired into the air from Kenya's shoulders. Let's cross over to Nairobi to speak with Johnson Nderi, who's an economic analyst and corporate finance specialist. Johnson, this is fiscal policy 101, is it not? You've got to raise taxes, or rather raise revenues from taxes. Has the government done anything wrong?
Yes, and maybe context is important. What the government intends to spend for the year 2024-2025 is somewhere in the range of about 3.9 trillion plus debt redemptions of about 800 billion, puts it at somewhere in the region of 4.7 trillion Kenyan shillings. Now, from that 4.7 trillion, about 2 trillion is what we raised. 2.1 trillion is probably what we'll raise in the year 2023-2024. And this has not been deemed sufficient to fund government, and therefore they have decided to increase to bring in additional taxes to bulk up the revenues. The problem is, from a societal perspective, is that this is becoming unaffordable. The existing taxes are already harsh enough. So the question is, why additional tax revenues? So the question is, the following question then becomes, can the government cut spending? Because spending 4.7 trillion when you're only collecting 2.1 trillion seems like the problem here is the spending, not the tax collection.
Now, Johnson, the Kenyan Treasury warning, they're saying that if government yields to the protest, the financing hole will be about 200 billion shillings, about $1.6 billion. How do you plug that gap?
My suggestion, you plug it by cutting unnecessary expenditure. There are a lot of there's a lot of spending that is not necessary, that has been built into this budget. Which they can cut. The other way to do it is to sell of assets to raise additional revenues. And by the way, also cutting tax rates may actually be the way to go with regards to raising additional revenue, as opposed to cutting raising tax rates. At this point, I think there was a note by Parliament that increase of prices led to lower tax revenues from fuel, and therefore it defeats logic to talk about raising tax revenues, tax rates at this point. It's very likely that the government will actually yield higher revenues from cutting some of these taxes. So there's a whole raft of measures that the people believe are better with regards to raising tax revenues. But at this point, a lot of economists have argued that we've probably maximized on tax revenues, and maybe it's the government should think up of how to cut tax spending. And year on year, government has always raised spending.
Now, the protesters want the entire finance bill scrapped. Is that reasonable?
Incidentally, if the government decided not to pass this bill, what will then happen is just whatever has been ongoing will obtain. So all they just need to do is review the appropriations bill. Tax collection will still continue; nothing will change. So they can review the appropriations bill with regards to spending and cut on the spending, and the balance, the budget will balance.
Now, on the IMF bailout, Kenya took a bailout from the IMF. A staff-level agreement was just concluded to unlock more funding, and the IMF wants to see more fiscal responsibility. Isn't this straightforward?
Yes, everybody wants fiscal responsibility. The question is, how do you get there? Do you get there by maintaining growth in spending and raising tax rates, or do we get there by cutting spending and maintaining tax rates, or even cut tax rates and grow and potentially grow revenues? The problem with, I think the problem for everybody is that tax revenues, tax rates are, the government is insistent on raising tax rates and maintaining growth in spending. In fact, it would seem like there's no fiscal crisis, or going by the way the government has maintained spending, and this is what I think irks a lot of people.
All right, so on that note, a lot has been said about the need for governments to cut spending. Is that just for the optics, or is there a level of spending cuts that can meet the nation's budget targets?
Cutting taxation cutting spending is achievable. If you look at the various items that they have, for example, they've hired cabinet assistant secretaries. That's an unconstitutional position. You've got funding going to renovation of deputy president's residence, going to the tune of 600 million or 400 million. I don't think. That house is still quite new. I don't think it requires that kind of funding to renovate it. You've got funding going to the office of the first lady, which is also an unconstitutional office. So there's a lot of fats in there that can be cut. Per diems, traveling. So that is one area. I think the society believes there's a lot that can be cut without affecting the core services of government.
Got to ask you about Kenya's youth, the Gen Zs. What do you make of the fact that these protests were organized by young people and not labor unions?
It's quite impressive, actually. It was one of those things I was saying that you need to see to believe, because there's no central area. This is all crowdsourced. The information they have is called crowdsourced. I think they've been doing their very best to understand what's going on, they had copies of the appropriations bill. We had copies of the budget policy statements, because the budget making cycle usually starts, I think, towards the end of the previous calendar year. So there's a lot of information there. And that's why, to some extent, there is a lot of anger. People have been seeing the spending that our government has been doing, the profligacy, if you will. I think in terms of public participation, they watched public participation. They had what the various industries were presenting to Parliament. The various potential harms the finance bill will have wrecked, at least in the words industry captains. So they I think, was well informed. Information was crowdsourced, and they just thought it was unacceptable, and they organized themselves digitally, and then we saw what was happening.
Now, for President Ruto, is he in a tight spot, or should he be commended for making these hard choices?
I don't think there's any recommendation here, because the credit crisis, first of all, we're in a credit crisis that government walked into with its eyes wide open. The president has been in this government. He was in the previous government for 10 years. So none of this is new to him. So the policies of the previous government are the what put us in this credit crisis in the first place. Now, the other problem is he sustained the policies that put us in the credit crisis. So I didn't see any, save for trying to raise tax revenues, which so far has failed with regards to containing the credit crisis. He's not done anything else substantive with regards to managing the debt crisis. So in my view, I think this government, just as much as the previous government, is as much to blame.
All right, Johnson, my final question for you. What does all this mean for cost of living for the average Kenyan? And what solutions do you think can be put forward to right the fiscal ship for Kenya?
And that's the core of this all. Raising tax rates will definitely harm cost of living. Already there's disruption in the credit markets because of high interest costs because of the credit crisis. So the needs, our fiscal policy needs a quick solution, or else it will drag down monetary policy as well. And you're going to start seeing phenomena like higher inflation rates, which was also a cause for agitation, I think, in the last 1 or 2 years. So the government needs to come to terms with its fiscal problems and face them head on. I think there are about 4 or 5 policy proposals that they can consider. Number one, reduce regulation. That will lead to increased economic room for investments and business. Number 2, lower tax rates. That's very critical for improved competitiveness. In the last 5, 6, 7 years, Kenya has lost a lot of competitiveness, and this is part of the reason why the government is struggling for revenues. So the government has been strangling the goose that's been laying the golden egg, and so it's reduced the yields. Rather, it's not growing as quickly as it needs to support the government debt. Other things are government spending. Other areas outside recurrent expenditure, maybe developed expenditure area. Some areas they can look at is their spending with regards to state-owned enterprises. That needs to be put in check. Some of our SOEs are huge black holes. And some we can actually generate some revenues from privatization. So privatization is the other policy proposal I would consider. And they should also consider restructuring some of the debt. Some voluntary asset swaps might be important just to manage, to stretch out the government's cash flows. That way, because, for example, at the beginning I said the government has about 800 billion worth of debt redemptions this year. So if you can lower debt redemptions and stretch that out, maybe the government will have a little bit of fiscal room, for example. So those are the policy proposals I would urge the government to consider, because whatever it's doing now isn't working and hasn't worked in the last 10 years.
Many thanks to Johnson Nderi, economic analyst and corporate finance specialist over in Nairobi.